Cowboy bought a ghost town for $50 but found a black widow with 3 children living there. The courthouse steps burned under Buck McCain's worn boots as he clutched his last $50. Dust coated his jacket and defeat weighed heavy on his shoulders. 3 failed mining partnerships had left him with nothing but mockery from fellow prospectors who called him the man who couldn't find gold in a mint. The auctioneer's voice cracked with barely contained laughter as he called for bids on Fallen Star. Nobody wanted the ghost town that had dried up 5 years ago when the silver ran out. Buck raised his trembling hand. $50 for a town nobody else would touch. The crowd erupted in snickers. Men elbowed each other and pointed at the desperate fool throwing away his last chance at survival. Buck signed the papers with dirt still caked under his fingernails and rode out to claim his questionable prize. Fallen Star stretched before him like a graveyard of broken dreams. Weathered buildings leaned against each other for support while tumbleweeds danced between empty doorways. Buck expected silence and solitude. Instead, smoke rose from the old general store chimney. He pushed through the creaking door and froze. A black woman in her 30s stood behind the counter with the bearing of someone who owned the place. 3 children flanked her like a protective wall. The oldest boy stepped forward with suspicious eyes, while a girl pretended to read but watched Buck's every move. The youngest hid behind his mother's skirts. Maeve Rivers didn't flinch at Buck's presence. She reached beneath the counter and produced a folded paper, her deed to the building, purchased legally from the previous owner before he died 8 months ago. Buck stared at the document. His purchase included all structures and inhabitants, but her claim looked legitimate. The legal gray area made his stomach churn. Word traveled fast to nearby Copper Ridge. Deputy Marshal Crane arrived within hours, accompanied by several stern-faced townspeople. They made their expectations clear without saying the words directly. The problem needed handling, and Buck needed to handle it. Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth stepped from her polished carriage like royalty addressing peasants. The territory's wealthiest ranch owner had opinions about proper property management. Her cold eyes swept over the Rivers family with obvious distaste. Buck learned the truth quickly. Solomon Rivers had been Copper Ridge's most skilled blacksmith. He built half the infrastructure that kept their town running. After his death from pneumonia, the community had turned their backs on his widow and children. 8 months of survival in isolation had made them ghosts in their own home. The pressure mounted daily. Business prospects hung in the balance. Mrs. Ashworth made it clear that Buck's future depended on solving his squatter problem immediately. When Evelyn accidentally mentioned her father's journals, containing secrets people paid him to keep quiet, everything changed. Buck discovered Mrs. Ashworth had been systematically buying abandoned properties around Fallen Star. She wanted his ghost town to complete a massive railroad land deal worth thousands. Mrs. Ashworth returned 3 days later with legal papers that rustled like threats in the desert wind. Her polished boots clicked across the general store's wooden floors as she surveyed Buck's predicament with cold satisfaction. The eviction notice bore official seals and intimidating language designed to crush resistance before it began. Buck stood in the doorway watching his world collapse. The woman who controlled half the territory's wealth had reduced him to a public spectacle. Townspeople gathered outside to witness his humiliation as she outlined his failures with surgical precision. The fool who couldn't manage his own property. The desperate man who bit off more than he could chew. The laughingstock who thought $50 could buy him a future. Each word landed like a physical blow, while Maeve Rivers stood silent behind her children. Mrs. Ashworth reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a crisp $100 bill. Double his investment. All he had to do was remove the unwanted inhabitants and sign the transfer papers. The money would solve his immediate problems and free him from this embarrassing situation. The alternative painted itself in stark terms. Arrest for harboring undesirables. Blacklisting from every business opportunity in the territory. A reputation so damaged that no honest work would ever come his way again. Mrs. Ashworth's influence reached into every corner of respectable society. Buck felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. Financial security beckoned from one direction while three frightened children huddled in the other. Maeve's dignified silence spoke louder than any plea for mercy. That evening, Maeve spread Solomon's journals across the counter like battle plans. Her fingers traced property boundaries with mathematical precision that made Buck's surveying background sing with recognition. Numbers flowed from her lips in perfect calculations that revealed years of careful study. She had been documenting irregularities across the territory for months, property lines that didn't match official records, boundary markers moved in the dead of night, legal descriptions that contradicted physical reality. The pattern painted a picture of systematic fraud stretching back years. Buck confessed his true history under the lamplight. Former railroad surveyor from Chicago, top of his profession until corrupt developers demanded falsified reports. His refusal had cost him everything, but his integrity remained intact. The mining failures weren't incompetence, but victims of claims sold multiple times to different buyers. Maeve revealed Solomon's greatest gift to her: advanced mathematics and surveying techniques learned through years of patient teaching. She could calculate land measurements from memory and spot discrepancies that escaped trained professionals. Her husband had prepared her for this fight without either of them knowing it. Tobias emerged from his protective shell to share knowledge inherited from his father: every hidden property marker in the region. Secret surveys Solomon had conducted as insurance against future disputes. Backup documentation scattered across the territory like breadcrumbs leading to the truth. Evelyn's sharp eyes had been cataloging inconsistencies in legal documents for weeks. Patterns invisible to adults blazed clearly in her organized mind. Names that appeared too frequently, dates that didn't align with official records, signatures that varied suspiciously across multiple contracts. The alliance formed naturally as their complementary skills revealed themselves. Buck's professional surveying expertise merged with Maeve's mathematical brilliance. Tobias guided them to evidence hidden in plain sight, while Evelyn organized their discoveries into damning proof. They worked through the night analyzing Solomon's journals against Buck's surveying knowledge. Mrs. Ashworth's railroad deal crumbled under scrutiny. The massive land grab depended on fraudulent claims that wouldn't survive professional examination. Forged documents and manipulated boundaries created an empire built on lies. Buck used his former professional connections to contact territorial authorities. His reputation as an honest surveyor had preceded him to the region. Deputy Marshal Crane had been waiting for someone with the expertise and evidence needed to build a solid case against Mrs. Ashworth's operation. The investigation revealed corruption stretching back years. Multiple property owners had been cheated, but lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. Mrs. Ashworth's wealth and influence had silenced complaints and intimidated victims into acceptance. Maeve calculated exact legal boundaries that proved Mrs. Ashworth's claims were invalid. Buck surveyed actual property lines with professional precision that left no room for argument. Their combined documentation created an ironclad case that even the most corrupt judge couldn't dismiss. Tobias guided them to hidden markers Solomon had placed as backup documentation. Physical evidence scattered across the territory that corroborated every calculation and survey. His father's foresight provided the final pieces of their legal puzzle. Evelyn organized their evidence into an irrefutable presentation that told the story of systematic fraud. Her attention to detail revealed connections that strengthened their case beyond any reasonable doubt. The quiet girl had become their secret weapon against Mrs. Ashworth's empire. Buck realized his $50 investment had bought him more than a ghost town. It had purchased a partnership with people whose integrity matched his own. Together, they possessed the knowledge and evidence needed to expose years of corruption and reclaim justice for countless victims. The trap was set. Mrs. Ashworth's next visit would find them prepared for war. But this battle would be fought with mathematics and surveying equipment instead of guns and threats. Truth would be their weapon and justice their ultimate prize. Buck looked at Maeve across the journal-covered counter and saw a partner worthy of respect. Tomorrow they would face down the most powerful person in the territory, armed only with facts and courage. It would have to be enough. Dawn broke over Fallen Star as Buck spread his surveying equipment across the dusty ground. His instruments caught the early light like weapons preparing for battle. Every calculation from the night before would need physical verification to stand up in territorial court. Maeve's mathematical abilities had revealed themselves through necessity rather than formal training. Solomon had taught her during long winter evenings when blacksmith work grew scarce. He would sketch property boundaries in the dirt while she calculated angles and distances in her head. What started as entertainment became survival skills when the community abandoned her family. Buck's photographic memory for land measurements had made him Chicago's most sought-after surveyor until corruption destroyed everything. Railroad companies had offered fortunes for falsified reports that would justify seizing Native American territories. His refusal had branded him as difficult and unreliable among the very people who profited from his honesty. The irony wasn't lost on him now. His reputation for integrity had followed him west like a shadow. Deputy Marshal Crane had been watching for someone with Buck's credentials to arrive in the territory. The federal government needed honest surveyors to investigate widespread land fraud complaints. Tobias emerged from the general store carrying his father's leather satchel. Inside lay hand-drawn maps that Solomon had created during his blacksmithing travels. Every ranch, mine, and settlement between Copper Ridge and the territorial border appeared in meticulous detail. Hidden property markers dotted the landscape like a secret code waiting to be deciphered. The boy's knowledge of terrain navigation came from accompanying his father on business trips. Solomon had taught him to read landscape features like words on a page. Rock formations told stories of ancient boundaries, while creek beds revealed original survey lines. The wilderness held its own records that couldn't be altered by corrupt officials. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the store's front porch organizing evidence into neat piles. Her gift for spotting inconsistencies had developed through years of helping her father with paperwork. Blacksmiths kept detailed records of materials and contracts. She had learned to catch arithmetic errors and missing signatures before they caused problems. The girl's inherited attention to detail now served a greater purpose. Mrs. Ashworth's fraudulent documents contained subtle variations that revealed their true origins. Signatures that changed over time, legal descriptions that contradicted each other, dates that fell outside possible timelines. The patterns painted a clear picture of systematic deception. Buck began his survey at the territorial boundary marker that anchored all subsequent measurements. His instruments confirmed what Maeve's calculations had predicted. Mrs. Ashworth's claimed boundaries extended far beyond her legitimate property lines. The railroad deal depended on land she didn't actually own. Each measurement built upon the previous one like links in an unbreakable chain. Buck's professional training guided him through the complex calculations, while Maeve verified his work with mathematical precision that impressed even his experienced eye. Their partnership created a level of accuracy that left no room for dispute. Tobias led them to hidden markers that his father had placed as backup documentation. Stone cairns disguised as natural formations, carved symbols on cliff faces that looked like ancient artwork, metal stakes buried beneath seemingly random brush piles. Solomon's foresight had created a secondary survey system that corroborated every official measurement. The physical evidence matched their paper trail perfectly. Mrs. Ashworth's empire stood on foundations that crumbled under professional scrutiny. Years of intimidation and influence couldn't overcome mathematical reality when documented by certified surveyors. Evelyn's organized presentation told the story chronologically. Mrs. Ashworth had started small with minor boundary adjustments that went unnoticed. Success bred ambition as she expanded her operations to include entire properties. The railroad deal represented the culmination of years spent perfecting her fraudulent system. Buck contacted territorial authorities using coded messages that his former colleagues would recognize. His reputation in Chicago had reached federal investigators who were building cases against Western land speculators. They had been waiting for someone with his credentials to provide the evidence needed for prosecution. Deputy Marshal Crane arrived that afternoon with news that changed everything. Federal marshals were en route from the territorial capital, with warrants based on Buck's preliminary reports. Mrs. Ashworth's operation had attracted attention at the highest levels of government. The investigation revealed victims across 3 territories who had been cheated out of legitimate property claims. Ranchers, miners, and farmers had lost everything to Mrs. Ashworth's systematic fraud. Many had given up fighting after facing her wealth and political connections. Maeve's documentation provided the missing pieces that federal investigators needed. Her mathematical analysis revealed the scope of corruption that individual victims couldn't see. The pattern of fraud stretched back years and involved dozens of accomplices in positions of authority. Buck realized that his $50 investment had purchased more than personal redemption. It had bought the key to unlocking justice for countless victims who had suffered in silence. The ghost town had become the foundation for exposing territorial corruption at its highest levels. The trap was ready. Mrs. Ashworth's next confrontation would find them armed with federal authority and irrefutable evidence. Her wealth and influence meant nothing against mathematical proof documented by certified professionals. Tobias stood guard while his sisters organized the final pieces of evidence. The boy who had learned to protect his family through suspicion and silence now served as sentinel for a cause that extended far beyond their personal survival. Buck looked across the surveyed landscape and saw justice taking physical form. Every measurement represented truth carved into the territory's foundation. Mrs. Ashworth's empire would fall not through violence, but through the inexorable power of documented reality. Mrs. Ashworth returned with reinforcements that made her intentions clear. 6 men in dark suits claimed to be legal representatives, but their hands rested too comfortably on weapon grips. They spread across Fallen Star like hunters surrounding cornered prey, while their employer surveyed the scene with cold satisfaction. The hired guns began ransacking the Rivers family belongings with methodical efficiency. Drawers flew open and contents scattered across the floor as they searched for Solomon's journals. Books tumbled from shelves, while furniture crashed against walls in their desperate hunt for evidence. Tobias stepped forward when rough hands grabbed his mother's personal effects. The 16-year-old's protective instincts overrode caution as he tried to shield his family from the invasion. 2 men seized his arms and shoved him against the wall, while little Samuel screamed in terror behind Maeve's skirts. Mrs. Ashworth watched the chaos with satisfied detachment. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to having orders followed without question. No court in the territory would believe the word of a failed prospector and a colored woman over her testimony. The legal system belonged to people like her who understood how influence and money created their own version of justice. Buck felt familiar rage building in his chest, the same fury that had cost him his Chicago career when developers demanded falsified reports, the same principled anger that had driven him to poverty rather than compromise his integrity. This moment would define who he truly was beneath the dust and desperation. Maeve stepped forward with Solomon's leather-bound journals clutched against her chest. Her mathematical calculations covered every page in neat handwriting that documented years of careful observation. Property boundaries, survey measurements, and legal discrepancies filled the volumes like evidence waiting for its day in court. The journals contained more than numbers and measurements. They held Solomon's detailed observations of every transaction, conversation, and suspicious activity he had witnessed while working throughout the territory. Names, dates, and locations created a comprehensive record of Mrs. Ashworth's fraudulent empire. Buck revealed his prepared legal case with the confidence of someone who had spent years building ironclad documentation. His surveying equipment had verified every calculation, while his professional credentials gave weight to findings that amateur observers might dismiss. The evidence painted an undeniable picture of systematic land fraud. Mrs. Ashworth's composure cracked as the scope of their investigation became clear. Federal involvement changed the stakes from local intimidation to territorial prosecution. Her hired guns shuffled nervously as Buck outlined connections that reached far beyond Fallen Star's dusty borders. Deputy Marshal Crane chose that moment to reveal his true purpose. Months of investigation had built a case that needed only expert verification to proceed. Buck's arrival had provided the missing piece that federal prosecutors required for conviction. The honest surveyor's reputation had preceded him from Chicago like a beacon of hope for territorial justice. Federal marshals emerged from concealment positions around Fallen Star, where they had been waiting for Mrs. Ashworth's incriminating response. Their presence transformed the confrontation from local dispute to federal case, with consequences that wealth and influence couldn't purchase. The hired guns found themselves surrounded by superior numbers and legitimate authority. Neutral witnesses from the territorial capital stepped forward to observe the proceedings with official sanction. Court stenographers began documenting every word, while federal investigators collected physical evidence that would support prosecution. Mrs. Ashworth's private intimidation had become public accountability. The mathematical proof spoke for itself through Maeve's precise calculations and Buck's professional measurements. Property boundaries told their own story that couldn't be altered by threats or bribes. Physical evidence scattered across the territory corroborated every accusation with scientific accuracy. Tobias guided federal marshals to hidden markers that his father had placed as backup documentation. Each discovery strengthened the case against Mrs. Ashworth while revealing the scope of Solomon's foresight. The blacksmith had been building evidence for years without knowing his widow would need it for survival. Evelyn's organized presentation connected individual crimes into a pattern of systematic fraud that spanned multiple territories. Her attention to detail revealed the true scope of Mrs. Ashworth's operation, while providing federal prosecutors with a clear timeline of criminal activity. Other property owners emerged from shadows where fear had kept them silent. Ranchers, miners, and farmers stepped forward with their own stories of fraud and intimidation. Mrs. Ashworth's empire had created victims across the territory who had been waiting for someone brave enough to lead the fight for justice. The hired guns found their authority evaporating as federal marshals took control of the situation. Violence held no appeal when faced with legitimate law enforcement backed by territorial authority. Their employers' wealth meant nothing against federal warrants and professional investigators. Mrs. Ashworth's railroad deal collapsed as the fraudulent foundation supporting it crumbled under scrutiny. Investors withdrew their backing when faced with evidence that their land acquisitions were built on illegal claims. Years of careful planning disintegrated in minutes of mathematical proof. The legal system that Mrs. Ashworth had manipulated through wealth and influence now turned against her with federal authority that transcended local corruption. Territorial prosecutors had been building cases for months while waiting for evidence that Buck and Maeve provided. Buck watched Mrs. Ashworth's empire fall through the power of documented truth rather than violence or revenge. Justice emerged from mathematics and surveying equipment wielded by people who valued integrity above personal gain. The ghost town had become the stage for territorial transformation. Federal marshals began the arrest process while Mrs. Ashworth stared in disbelief at her changing circumstances. The woman who had controlled half the territory through intimidation now faced prosecution for crimes that her victims had been documenting in secret for years. The confrontation ended not with gunfire, but with handcuffs and legal documents that would restore stolen property to rightful owners across multiple territories. The territorial court moved swiftly once federal marshals presented their evidence. Mrs. Ashworth's fraudulent land empire crumbled under mathematical scrutiny that no amount of wealth could counter. Judge after judge reviewed Buck and Maeve's documentation with growing amazement at the scope of corruption their investigation had revealed. Property deeds that had seemed legitimate for years proved worthless when measured against professional surveying standards. Boundary lines dissolved under Buck's precise calculations, while Maeve's mathematical analysis exposed the systematic nature of the fraud. What had appeared to be isolated incidents formed a pattern of territorial theft spanning decades. Federal prosecutors worked around-the-clock processing claims from victims who emerged from silence like survivors of a long siege. Ranchers reclaimed stolen grazing lands, while miners regained access to claims they thought were lost forever. Farmers discovered their property lines extended far beyond what Mrs. Ashworth's manufactured documents had indicated. The railroad deal that had motivated the entire conspiracy collapsed when investors learned their land acquisitions were built on criminal fraud. Construction contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars evaporated overnight as federal authorities froze assets and seized illegally obtained properties. Mrs. Ashworth faced prosecution that would strip away everything she had built through corruption and intimidation. Her political connections meant nothing against federal charges backed by irrefutable evidence. The woman who had controlled territorial justice now became its most prominent victim. Buck and Maeve found their legal partnership officially recognized by territorial authorities, who praised their investigation as the most thorough land fraud case in regional history. Federal judges validated both Buck's purchase of Fallen Star and the Rivers family's property rights within the ghost town boundaries. Deputy Marshal Crane ensured their ongoing legal protection, while federal authorities processed the massive case against Mrs. Ashworth's criminal network. The honest lawman had been building connections with victims for months while waiting for someone with Buck's expertise to provide the evidence needed for prosecution. Solomon's journals became the cornerstone of multiple federal cases as prosecutors discovered their documentation extended far beyond Mrs. Ashworth's immediate crimes. The blacksmith had unknowingly created a historical record of territorial corruption that would reshape land ownership throughout the region. Buck's reputation as an honest surveyor spread through federal law enforcement circles, where integrity was valued above political connections. Territorial authorities offered him contracts to resurvey disputed properties throughout the region, while ensuring fair compensation for his professional expertise. The true revelation came when Buck's advanced surveying revealed Fallen Star's hidden treasure. Underground water sources flowed beneath the ghost town in quantities that dwarfed the original silver deposits. The aquifer could support agricultural development that would transform the entire territory's economic future. Maeve's calculations confirmed the water source's potential, while her mathematical analysis revealed optimal locations for wells and irrigation systems. The partnership between surveyor and mathematician created possibilities neither could have achieved alone. Their combined expertise turned a $50 ghost town into the foundation for territorial prosperity. Buck proposed a formal business partnership that would combine his surveying credentials with Maeve's mathematical brilliance and record-keeping abilities. Federal contracts would provide steady income, while private clients sought their services for legitimate property disputes throughout the region. Tobias began apprenticing under Buck's guidance to become a certified surveyor himself. The protective teenager channeled his defensive instincts into learning professional skills that would serve his family for generations. His inherited knowledge of terrain features complemented formal training in surveying techniques. Evelyn's exceptional organizational abilities made her invaluable for managing the complex documentation their business required. Her attention to detail ensured accuracy in legal filings, while her analytical mind spotted inconsistencies that even experienced professionals might miss. Little Samuel finally experienced childhood without fear, as federal protection eliminated threats against his family. The 6-year-old explored fallen stars buildings with the curiosity that had been suppressed by months of survival mode existence. His laughter echoed through rooms that had known only silence for years. Water rights associated with the underground source provided long-term financial security that exceeded anything Buck had imagined when he made his desperate $50 bid. The ghost town's true value lay not in precious metals, but in the life-giving resource that would attract legitimate settlers for decades to come. Federal authorities established Fallen Star as a model community for honest development practices. Their investigation had exposed corruption throughout the territory, while providing a blueprint for preventing future fraud through proper surveying and documentation procedures. Maeve opened the territory's first surveying and property documentation service, operated by someone other than government officials. Her mathematical expertise and Solomon's documented legacy created a business that served property owners who had been victimized by fraudulent practices for years. The Rivers family gained respect throughout the territory as their role in exposing Mrs. Ashworth's crimes became widely known. Former neighbors who had abandoned them after Solomon's death now sought their services for legitimate business needs. Buck's transformation from failed prospector to respected professional demonstrated how integrity and expertise could overcome desperate circumstances when combined with courage and partnership. His $50 investment had purchased not just property, but the foundation for a completely different life. The ghost town began attracting legitimate settlers who valued honest dealing over quick profits. Wells tapped the underground water source while agricultural experiments tested the soil's potential for sustainable farming. Fallen Star slowly awakened from its death-like sleep. Federal recognition of their investigation's importance brought Buck and Maeve to the attention of territorial governors, who needed honest professionals to prevent future corruption. Their partnership became a model for combining different expertise areas to achieve results neither could accomplish alone. 6 months after the territorial court's final ruling, Fallen Star pulsed with life that would have seemed impossible during its ghost town days. Hammers rang against nails as carpenters erected new buildings, while merchants unpacked goods for the first general store competition the town had seen in years. Children's laughter replaced the whistle of desert wind through empty doorways. Buck McCain stood on the rebuilt porch of what had once been his $50 gamble and surveyed the transformation with quiet satisfaction. His surveying business brought steady contracts from across 3 territories as word spread about the man who had exposed the region's largest land fraud conspiracy. Federal authorities recommended his services to anyone requiring honest property documentation. The underground water source had attracted agricultural pioneers who recognized the potential for sustainable farming in previously barren territory. Wells dotted the landscape like promises of prosperity, while irrigation channels carried life, giving water to experimental crops that would feed growing communities for generations. Maeve Rivers had become the territory's most sought-after property documentation specialist. Her mathematical precision and Solomon's inherited knowledge created a business that served victims of fraudulent land deals throughout the region. Former adversaries now paid premium rates for services they had once tried to eliminate through intimidation. The official letter from the territorial governor had arrived on a Tuesday morning that would remain etched in Buck's memory forever. Fallen Star was officially recognized as an incorporated town, with all the rights and protections that designation provided. Federal authorities had chosen their community as a model for honest development practices. Buck's appointment as municipal surveyor came with recognition that extended far beyond local boundaries. His role in exposing Mrs. Ashworth's corruption had established his reputation among federal investigators who valued integrity above political connections. The failed prospector had become one of the territory's most trusted professionals. Maeve's appointment as municipal administrator made history as the first such position held by a black woman in the territory. Her mathematical brilliance and organizational skills had impressed federal officials, who recognized competence regardless of social prejudices that still plagued less enlightened communities. Tobias had grown into his apprenticeship with enthusiasm that surprised even Buck's experienced eye. The protective teenager channeled his family loyalty into professional skills that would serve multiple generations. His surveying examinations approached with confidence, built through months of practical training under Buck's patient guidance. Evelyn managed their business documentation with precision that amazed clients accustomed to sloppy record-keeping from previous providers. Her inherited attention to detail prevented the errors and oversights that had enabled fraudulent practices throughout the territory for decades. Little Samuel attended the territory's first integrated school, where children learned together regardless of their families' backgrounds or circumstances. His innocent curiosity had returned as federal protection, eliminated the fears that once dominated his young life. The boy who had hidden behind his mother's skirts now played openly with neighbors of all descriptions. The thriving business partnership between Buck and Maeve had created employment opportunities for dozens of families seeking honest work in a community built on merit rather than corruption. Their success demonstrated how different backgrounds and expertise could combine to achieve results that benefited entire communities. Federal contracts continued flowing as territorial authorities expanded their anti-fraud investigations to neighboring regions. Buck and Maeve's methodology became the standard for exposing land fraud, while their professional training programs prepared other honest surveyors to continue the work. Mrs. Ashworth's former empire had been redistributed to legitimate owners, whose property rights were now protected by federal law and professional documentation. The railroad deal that had motivated her crimes was rebuilt on honest foundations that benefited communities rather than enriching corrupt individuals. The general store where Maeve had once faced eviction now served as headquarters for a business that employed half the town's residents. The building that had sheltered a desperate widow and her children had become the foundation for territorial transformation that reached far beyond Fallen Star's boundaries. Buck reflected on the journey from desperate courthouse bidder to respected municipal official while watching children play in streets that had known only tumbleweeds 6 months earlier. His $50 investment had purchased not just property, but partnership with people whose integrity matched his own values. The evening sun painted Fallen Star's buildings gold as Buck, and Maeve reviewed applications from families seeking to join their growing community. Honest settlers outnumbered available properties as word spread about a town where merit mattered more than social status or family connections. Letters arrived weekly from federal investigators praising their work in establishing honest development practices that other communities could emulate. The ghost town had become a beacon for territorial justice that attracted attention from as far away as Washington, where politicians sought solutions to Western corruption. Buck's transformation from ridiculed failure to territorial authority demonstrated how circumstances could change when integrity met opportunity. The man who couldn't find gold in a mint had discovered something far more valuable in partnership with people who shared his commitment to justice and honest dealing. Fallen Star's incorporation ceremony had drawn federal officials, territorial governors, and honest settlers from across the region. The celebration marked not just municipal recognition, but proof that communities built on truth and partnership could thrive in the harshest environments. True wealth had emerged through courage, competence, and the determination to stand up for justice regardless of personal cost or social expectations. And that is all to the story, for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.